In this video, we're going to explore an extremely important topic in music, scales. What is a scale? A scale is a linear sequence of notes that usually repeats every octave. Thinking about scales abstractly, pretty much any way you organize a linear sequence of notes starting on one letter and ending on the same letter an octave up qualifies as a scale, but some are much more useful than others. Using half steps only, we can construct the most basic kind of scale, the chromatic scale. Since the chromatic scale uses half steps, it never skips a note. If you play a chromatic scale from the very bottom of the piano all the way up to the top, you'll have played every single note on the piano. It's called the chromatic scale because it has all of the colors, so to speak, of the piano, because it literally plays every single note. You might ask the question, how many notes does the chromatic scale have? Well, there's two ways to think about it. On the one hand, you could say that it has 88 notes because the piano has 88 notes and the chromatic scale goes all the way up and down. Or you could look at a bite-sized chunk and see what repeats. Let's say that we start the chromatic scale at the letter A. So we'd play A, B flat, B, C, D flat, D, E flat, E, F, G flat, G, A flat, and then of course we'd arrive back at the letter A. But once we get to A again, an octave higher than we started, we're just playing the same sequence of notes. So since there are only 12 notes in an octave, you might say that the chromatic scale is a 12-tone scale, which is in fact what it is. This concept is going to come in handy for us later. The chromatic scale is constructed using only half steps, and you also might ask, is there a scale that is constructed only of whole steps? There is, and it's called the whole tone scale. It sounds like this. Let's play a whole tone scale starting on the note C. Up a whole tone from C is D, up another whole tone, E, up one more whole tone, F sharp, then G sharp, then A sharp, then one more whole tone brings us back to C. In two octaves, it sounds like this. The whole tone scale has a very ethereal quality, almost like we're in a dreamscape or moving through another dimension or a time warp or something. Notice that the whole tone scale only has 6 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because then we arrive back at the original note that we started on. Since there are 12 total notes in an octave, but only 6 notes in the whole tone scale, then there are actually 2 separate whole tone scales. There's the one that contains these notes, and then there's the one that contains all the notes that this one skips over. Both are whole tone scales. From C sharp up a whole step, we have D sharp up a whole step, F up a whole step, G up a whole step, A up a whole step, B. 2 separate, totally viable whole tone scales. If this is a little confusing right now, that's all right. The whole tone scale won't come up too much in this program, and I introduce it here just as a theoretical concept to show you that such a scale exists. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on the chromatic scale. Let's take one more look at the chromatic scale. The notes are pretty scrunched together, and since it contains all 12 notes, it can start on any note. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to start on the note G. The question is, how can we play it smoothly and comfortably? Let's try a couple different options. Just playing with one finger at a time, I can get to all the notes, but it's probably not as quick as some other options that use all the rest of my fingers. By the way, you will get the most out of this video if you try to play along with what I'm doing so your fingers get a tactile experience of the concepts that I'm explaining. Okay, starting on G. If I play a note with every single finger, starting with my thumb and ending with my pinky, I'll be able to play 5 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But then I'd get stuck. If I try to cross my thumb under my pinky to play the next note, I run into a little bit of a jam. I have to move my arm all the way out of the way like this, or this would be very uncomfortable. My hand just isn't built to do an anatomical maneuver like this. So what about this? What if I skipped the pinky, didn't go to there, and just ended it at the ring finger? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I have some space to cross my thumb under and start again. So here we go. After the first 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, we get this convenient crossover. But what happens after the second 4 notes? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, to get to the next note, this E flat up here, I have to cross my thumb up here above my ring finger, which is basically impossible without some very uncomfortable contortion. So we must ask ourselves the question, what is the most convenient way to finger the scale? That's the technical term that pianists use. What is the fingering of the scale? Here is the most popular one that's generally accepted. We'll start with our thumb on G. Then we'll move to our middle finger for the next black key. By rotating ever so slightly, our thumb is conveniently poised to play the next white key. And as we lift up our middle finger, it becomes conveniently poised to play the next black note. So we'll place our thumb down once again, but here we run into a small problem. We have 2 white notes in a row. We want to use our middle finger on the next black key to set us up for the alternating middle finger thumb pattern that we've just been using. In order to do that, we'll recruit our index finger to play the second white note. So up to here, we have this. Thumb, middle, thumb, middle, thumb, index, middle. And that gets us from G all the way up to C sharp. We can alternate thumb and middle finger. And then when we get to the next spot with 2 white notes, we'll use the same technique and recruit our index finger to play the second white note. In this manner, we can go all the way from G to G. And if we can go from G to G, then of course we can go all the way up and down the piano. This way we can do it without having to do anything uncomfortable with our hands. Coming down, each finger will play the same notes that it did coming up. Middle finger on each black note, thumb on the white notes, and when there are 2 white notes in a row, our index finger will play the rightmost one and our thumb will play the leftmost one, like so. Thumb, middle, index, thumb, middle, thumb, middle, index, thumb, middle, thumb, middle, thumb, middle, index, thumb, etc. As you can imagine, the left-hand pattern is very similar. But before we get to it, I want to introduce one last concept. It's fine to call your fingers by their English names, thumb, index, middle, ring, pinky. But there's a shorthand that piano players use all the time. It's a simple number system. Thumb is 1, index is 2, middle is 3, ring is 4, and pinky is 5. And of course the same for the left hand. Thumb is 1, index is 2, middle is 3, ring is 4, pinky is 5. It might seem strange to need a shorthand to talk about your fingers, but for piano players, this is very, very useful. Just like we did a moment ago, when pianists practice anything, they think about which specific fingers they're going to use to play which specific keys. It's nice to have a shorthand way to talk about it. For example, for the chromatic scale, we can write the right hand fingering like this. Thumb, or 1, on G, 3, or the middle finger, on this A flat, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then of course back to 1. So what you notice is that you're using your third finger, the middle finger, on each of the black notes and 1 and 2 on the white notes. Only 2 when there's 2 white notes in a row like this. So 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, etc. For the left hand, the pattern is very similar, except since your hand is laid out in the opposite way, you have 2 on the first white note and then 1 on the second white note. 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1. We can write this out just to be clear. 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, and of course back to 1. 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, 2, 1, 3, 1. When you practice the chromatic scale by yourself, really try to stick to this fingering. It'll be tempting to just go up and down like this, or to use some other fancy way that you've just come up with. With this fingering, however, it is extremely easy to fly up and down the piano, and it's going to be really useful to have this in your fingers separately when you start putting them together.